Unity in opportunity. Please be seated. Today we celebrate one of our own, the Right Reverend William Alexander Guerry, a 20th century prophet. A collection of his writings typed by our own Susie Jenkins. No? A great, great book about a great man. Today we're going to talk about some truths. Big T truths and little T truths. Little T truths. A few years ago I sat in these very pews and I heard a story about a great man. I'm ashamed to admit I did not know the story. I want to know more. I grew up in Charleston, a lifelong Episcopalian. Bishop Guerry went to Porter School. My brother went there, I went there, my dad went there. We never knew the story. My sister went to Sewanee, his alma mater, and where he later preached. Never knew the story. Porter School moved to MUSC, my alma mater again. I never knew the story. I grew up downtown St. Philip's Church. I never knew the story. I was confirmed in the very same office building where this senseless act happened. I never knew the story. I lived directly across the street from where it happened. I never knew the story. As a boy, I played in St. Philip's graveyard, where the bishop's body lies at eternal rest. I never knew the story. He lies literally 50 feet from my front door. I never knew the story until I was here and I heard. This is not a testament to my ignorance, of which I assure you there is an overabundance. You can ask my wife, you can ask my kids. I'm talking about unity, the opportunity for unity. A story about truth and action. Truth, I'm not talking about the kind of facts I deal with in the forensic world. Things exemplified by the newspaper headline of the time. Details, June 1928. Quote, Bishop Guerry dies of bullet wound. Was shot by retired pastor, believed demented, who committed suicide. Forgave his assailant. Had been head of South Carolina Diocese of Protestant Episcopal Church since 1908. Little T truth, this wasn't about dementia. It was about hatred and racism. Big T truth of God in Christ. I am the way, the life, and the truth. No one comes to the Father except through me. To appreciate the context, let me quote our own Rector Cowley. Quote, Bishop Guerry was driven by a sense of racial justice grounded in a need for the diverse unity of all people that put him far ahead of his time. It cost him his life. The bishop was born in 1861, right after the start of the Civil War. Now, for years after the war, the South and South Carolina was destitute, poverty, hungry, devastation was everywhere. In rebuilding, the diocese had to address the role of newly freed African Americans. Toward that end, in 1865, the diocese helped establish a school to provide education to freed blacks. Many whites saw this as a threat. Little T truth. Race relations would hang over our nation as a threatening storm cloud for decades after, in fact, to this very day. The Civil War saw a 90% decrease in black congregants in our diocese, down to just 300 people. Most shifted to other denominations, such as the AME Church. Against this backdrop, Bishop Guerry would attend school at what is now Porter-Gaud. That school was founded after the war by Dr. Anthony Toomer Porter, who wanted to help destitute and orphan children, including young blacks. Here, Dr. Bishop Guerry saw Dr. Porter and what he did, his desire to educate young black children. Little T truth, this was not a widely accepted agenda. Probably made even less popular by the fact that General William Tecumseh Sherman, yes, that Sherman, supported Porter's efforts. And in fact, the story is that Dr. Porter had rescued a captive Union officer and took him back across the line to return him to his Union command. That act of tender mercy so impressed then President Andrew Jackson that he met with Porter at the White House and gave him $200 to support the effort. Surely here young Guerry saw exemplified the mercy of our first reading. Quote, "The Lord has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives and release from darkness for the prisoners. They will renew the ruined cities." During Reconstruction, parishes struggled with race and resisted admission of blacks as full members of the diocese. For example, on Easter Sunday, literally 1 week after Lee's surrender at Appomattox, St. Mark's, a predominantly black congregation downtown, was formed from blacks who had been expelled from churches where just the week before they had worshiped with whites. Racist decisions continued, and our diocese lost many black members to the newly forming Reformed Episcopal Church. But St. Mark's remained with us, despite overt racism allowing it to do so. You see, they could only stay as long as their rector was white. Little T truth, our diocese was openly racist and saw nothing wrong with it. Now, young Guerry finished high school, and thanks to a scholarship secured by Dr. Porter, he went on to Sewanee, where he got his bachelor's, master's, and divinity degrees. He stayed there as chaplain and also professor of homiletics and pastoral theology. I could have used his help with writing this sermon. Guerry was called back home to South Carolina and became our 8th diocesan bishop in 1908. Now, his episcopate began on a great note. They had the official seal for the diocese adopted. Women were given the vote in the parish for the first time ever. Our numbers were increasing and better than ever, 8,800 congregants in over 100 churches and 60 clergy. This did include a black convocation where senior white clergy were assigned to oversee black Episcopal congregations. This numbered 32 missions and 19 day schools with over 1,200 students. This in a state led by the likes of Pitchfork Ben Tillman, former governor and then U.S. Senator from South Carolina, who said, quote, "Whites have absolute control of the state government, and we intend at any and all hazards to retain it. All men are created equal. It's not true now. It was not true when Jefferson wrote it," end quote. One of Tillman's sad legacies was the 1895 South Carolina Constitution, which took the vote away from most blacks. Many whites felt it a moral duty to separate the races. Educating blacks was viewed by many whites as a treasonous act. Little T truth, our state was openly racist and saw nothing wrong with it. There were other issues. A living Christianity for the public good, specifically for justice and equality, also known as the social gospel, was taking hold. Guerry was one of the few Southern leaders who adopted this philosophy to confront pressing issues like economic inequality, poverty, education, labor conditions, alcoholism, crime, slums, unclean environment, poor schools, dangers of war, and racial injustice. They had radical ideas such as free dispensaries for medical emergencies, employment bureaus for job seekers, workers' compensation, summer camps for children, night schools for extended learning, and English language classes for immigrants. In his support, Bishop Guerry was not alone, but he certainly was lonely. He had a passion for addressing these difficult issues, both in his writings, his preaching. He always was looking for answers. He may not have them, but he always looked, and oftentimes answers would come in the conversations, the deep conversations that followed. After all, Guerry was at the core a uniter, desperately trying to keep the racially integrated church together and to move the church forward to do God's work in this world. Bishop Guerry, quote, "We should strive for unity, not uniformity. Uniformity is mechanical, barren, unfruitful, and unprofitable. Unity is organic, living, and capable of endless growth. If we are to be truly Catholic, as Christ himself is Catholic, then we must have a church broad enough to embrace within its communion every living human soul." End quote. Big T truth, Paul's first letter to the Corinthians. We were all baptized by one Spirit so as to form one body. God has put the body together so that there should be no division in the body, but that its parts should have equal concern for each other. Guerry proposed a black suffragan bishop to minister to black Episcopalians, providing them with a much-needed real voice within the diocese. For those unfamiliar, a suffragan bishop has administrative and pastoral responsibilities, but is not part of apostolic succession. So separate and less than equal. The suffragan plan was voted down, and Guerry graciously accepted that vote. Quote, "Not only in my judgment is the alternate plan subversive of Catholic order and destructive of the unity of the church, but it is fraught with grave dangers to the black parishioners themselves. I shall always advocate the suffragan plan, but I do not think that that gives me the right to agitate the question further." Undaunted, Bishop Guerry continued his call for social justice. He continued his support for education, for example, funding for what is now Voorhees University in Denmark, South Carolina, a predominantly black school. This in a diocese where the Speaker of the House of State Representatives hosted a KKK barbecue, where in 1925 in the diocese, a Klan rally included a funeral and over 200 members of the Klan in full regalia marching through the streets. Small t truth, hatred thrived here. Big T truth, Bishop Guerry, quote, "Our high calling under God is to burn away the barriers which divide us, to allay prejudice, to strengthen the ties which bind brother to brother, section to section, and to make of this great land one free people." Now on to the tragic events of June 1928. Our subject, Woodward, was a non-parochial priest with an itinerant religious background, a man who had served in the diocese under Bishop Guerry, a man who as priest had shot a black man who he claimed to be a burglar entering his home, a man who was acquitted at trial, a man who self-published a racial diatribe attacking Bishop's suffragan bishop plan, a man consumed by his hatred of integration. The mindset is exemplified by a letter to Bishop Guerry from one of his priest friends who wrote even before 1928, quote, "Woodward is not responsible, and that makes it exceedingly dangerous for anyone to deal with him. I pity Woodward. Can you give him one more chance? Your course has been the most considerate. Woodward doesn't think so." End quote. Now on Sunday, June 3rd, Woodward attends services at St. Michael's. Coincidentally and personally, he also, the bishop, had his last services here the same Sunday. at St. John's. On Monday, June 4th, Woodward shows up at the bishop's offices at St. Philip's. On entering the meeting, Guerry said to his secretary, quote, "Woodward is half crazy, and there's no telling what he'll do," end quote. The meeting seemed to go well, uneventful. In fact, they met for an extended period of time. Then the bishop came out, talked to his secretary, signed a few letters, routine stuff, then went back in, and 5 minutes later, a shot rang out. The secretary heard the bishop call her name, and then a second final shot rang out. She rushed in to find chairs overturned in the office and a check for $50 made out to Woodward from the bishop's discretionary fund sitting on the bishop's desk. Bishop had been shot in the chest, Woodward in the head. Both were rushed to Roper Hospital. The shooter died the same day. The inquest later determined it to be a suicide. Clearly, Woodward had known the evil of this act, having earlier written in that same racial diatribe, quote, "Whoever interlopes between a bishop and his flock with whatever apparent justification is promptly and properly repudiated. He that plots against his bishop serves the devil," end quote. Guerry miraculously came through his surgery and seemed to be doing well. On hearing of Woodward's death, he had these words, "Father, forgive him. He knew not what he did. Pray for him." Tragically, over the ensuing days, the bishop developed pneumonia and died on June 9th, 1928. Tragically, ironically, penicillin, which surely would have saved his life, was invented 3 months later. Bishop Guerry demonstrated his living faith in fully understanding the words of Luke's gospel today. I tell you, my friends, do not be afraid of those who kill the body and after that can do no more. Fear him who, after your body has been killed, has authority to throw you into hell. End quote. In refusing to condemn or return the hatred of his attacker, Bishop Guerry overcame the true enemy. His compassion exemplifies the better angels of our nature. Big T truth from Bishop Guerry. Christ did not die instead of us. He died that we might learn to die like him. Epilogue, opportunity. Sadly, our own diocesan history confirms that, quote, "The story of the reasons behind the bishop's death was buried so effectively that until recently we as a diocese had lost the collective memory of having had as our own chief priest and pastor a bishop who gave it all for the sake of inclusion and justice." Our own beloved diocesan Chancellor Emeritus Tom Tisdale studied Guerry's history and was surprised how few lifelong Episcopalians, folks like me, in Charleston, knew the story. Tisdale lamented, quote, "It's quite a story. He is a hero. It's like it has been erased," end quote. Mr. Tisdale corrected that, authoring Truth in Cold Blood, a play memorializing what happened and why, lest we ever forget again. In 2018, the Dean of the Canterbury Cathedral added Bishop Guerry to the roll of Anglican martyrs. In 2020, the diocese established the Racial Justice and Reconciliation Commission. Small t truth, we strive to remember and to do better. In closing, 2 thoughts from Bishop Guerry. First on truth, quote, "Truth is not something finished and mechanical. Truth is something organic and living. Like that tree of life which the apostles saw growing by the river of life, which bare 12 manner of fruits, and its leaves were for the healing of nations." And Bishop Guerry on the unity of God's church. A divided church cannot represent Christ, for Christ is one, and his life is one. And his church must be one in order to fully represent him and convey to others his gospel of salvation. Amen.